Deborah Waggoner, welcome back again for the second time to Unitarian Anabaptist.
Thank you, Tom. My pleasure to be with you.
Okay. So yesterday, we had a conversation on the Gospel of Matthew. Today, you're going to fill us in on the Luke narrative.
Right, the Gospel of Luke. So, when we talked about the Gospel of Matthew, there was one thing that I did not address that I do want to backstory in. The curse on the Jeconiah. Jeconiah is mentioned in Matthew's narrative, and scholars have a field day with this because Jeconiah was cursed. But in the Babylonian Talmud, which most Christians do not accept as authoritative, we are told the curse was lifted. But what I'm convinced of is, and I've heard rabbis say that the New Testament alludes to the Talmud in many places, which I have researched that, and I tend to agree. And this is one of those places that the New Testament writers, the Gospel of Matthew, the author, I'm convinced, must have believed that curse had been lifted. Because even if you think that the author of the Gospel of Matthew did not believe Jesus was the natural son of Joseph, even if you believe he was adopted, the curse is still there. Why do you want to put this narrative in there of a cursed lineage and claim it in any way, shape, or form?
That's true.
So I just want to put that in there, that it is in the Babylonian Talmud, which I do cite in my book. So, but a lot of churches do not accept the Talmud as authoritative. So I did want to address that, which is interesting because if you believe in sola scriptura, scripture alone, there is no genealogy for Mary in the Christian Bible. So we're going to look through the Gospel of Luke, which most pastors every pastor I've encountered says this genealogy in the Gospel of Luke is Mary's genealogy, but I just want to preface everything I'm going to say with her name's not in it. Okay, so let's just bear that in mind. So we're going to start, I'm just going to read the King James text, and then we'll have a few comments on it. In verse 3 and 4, the author, who I'll just call Luke, there's discussion about that, but for expedience sake, verse 3, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. So this author, end quote, this author is saying that he has perfect understanding. So I would expect if he has perfect understanding, of the origins of Jesus, he's going to tell us, he's going to clarify for us that unlike what the rabbis are saying, who say that Jesus is that the Messiah must have a natural father who's traced to King David through Solomon, but the rabbis are wrong. I want to make, what's that word he used? Certain that you understand he has a natural mother who's traced to David through Nathan. That's what we're looking for him to say. So, let's dive into this. Let's dive into this. Okay, verse 26. I'm picking out what a lot of churches jump on as virgin birth proof text.
Sure.
Okay. So, verse 26 of Luke 1. And in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee named Nazareth to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. I'm reading from the King James, but if you go into the Greek, that word that they're translating as virgin is parthenos. And like I said, when we discussed the Gospel of Matthew, in the Greek Septuagint of Genesis 34:3, a woman was described as a parthenos after she had had intimate relations with a man. So if the New Testament writers are wanting to be specific that Mary wasn't just unwed like this other woman, but she was chaste, they would call her hanos. But they never did. So I just wanted to point that out, because in the English, they just gloss over that. Your English reader is not going to know that. You have to really do a deep dive to pick that up. Okay, we're going to go over to verse 29. And when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and cast in her mind what manner of salutation this should be. And the angel said unto her, Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb, and bring forth a son, and shalt call his name Jesus. Now this is my commentary. Here the angel announces that Mary will conceive. Notice that Mary doesn't react verbally or physically. The angel continues talking. The angel says, he changes the subject from Mary doing something to a man. He says, he shall be great, and he shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. So the angel has moved on now to talk about a man.
Yes. So can I make a comment there? Just something that comes up pretty obvious. That the angel is saying he shall reign over the house of David, his father. So this is something that Mary would have expected from the Messiah. And it shouldn't be surprising to us either, should it?
Right. And you know, I want to finish that train of thought there. So when the angel finishes talking about he a bunch of times, talking about, he's clearly moved on from you will do something that isn't abnormal. You're going to conceive. You're engaged. In the future, you're going to conceive. That's nothing abnormal about that. That wouldn't shock me. It shouldn't shock any young engaged woman that in the future are going to conceive.
Oh, yeah.
But it is kind of shocking, when it should be kind of shocking to hear that context in the land of Israel. She was young, and there were Roman soldiers, armed Roman soldiers, swarming the streets, killing anybody that wanted to rise up against the Roman Empire, which is exactly what the angel is saying her son's going to have to do. Okay, a little bit of context here. The Romans were occupying, so this could be a little bit of shocking. How's this going to happen? How is this going to happen?
So just to emphasize what you've said there, So, like you mentioned, Mary is engaged to be married. And if someone told you, hey, to an engaged woman, hey, you're going to conceive and you're going to bear a son, that would not be surprising.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially in that day and age. There was no birth control that I'm aware of. It was a lot more common that when you got married, you're going to have children than today. You know, it wouldn't be that shocking. And especially in her day and age, no one interpreted Isaiah 7:14 as a virgin birth.
Mm-hmm.
She was Jewish. I'm pretty sure her rabbi did not tell her to be looking for a virgin that was going to get pregnant and conceive a Messiah. So, you know,
They were looking for the Messiah. They were looking for their deliverer, their Messiah, the seed of David.
Right. But on the other hand, but wait, we're not quite done yet. Okay. At verse 33, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Okay. It's a child story that parents tell their children. Jesus resurrected on the third day and he ascended into heaven and he's going to come back someday. They tell it to 3-year-olds. But lest we forget that in this narrative 2,000 years ago, the story goes that was it Mary that told everybody she had seen the resurrected Jesus? They thought she was crazy. They were not expecting a resurrected Messiah. So when Mary hears the angel say, and of his kingdom there will be no end, he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. Right. That means he's going to have to be alive forever.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit shocking to me.
Right, right.
She wouldn't be a little, raise her eyebrows at least.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And additionally, another thing that caught my attention, he's going to reign over the house of Jacob. That's not just the Jews. That's all 12 tribes. The Jews are the house of Judah. That's like 2-ish tribes. But there were 12 tribes of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. In Mary's day, we got to get the context here. In Mary's day, those 10 lost tribes had assimilated, been carried off, and assimilated into the other nations. In her day, not only did Mary not know who those 10 lost tribes were, the 10 lost tribes didn't, and still don't know they are of the house of Israel. So this is kind of a shocking statement that the angel is making. It's an impossible feat. So let's read on, where I have a lot of commentary in my book on it. Verse 34. Now we're getting to Mary's statement. This is all stuff the pastors pick. Now we're getting to Mary's statement. Then said Mary to the angel, how shall this be, seeing I know not a man? How shall what be? How am I going to get pregnant? Or how is my child going to not only conquer Rome? These armed soldiers are all over the place. They're crucifying anyone who thinks he can conquer them. They're everywhere. I'm a peasant. I've heard she's peasant. Her husband was a carpenter. She wasn't, they were nothing. They didn't have, they just, they had to go to a stable. They weren't rich, I've heard. How is this going to happen? How is he going to find the lost tribes? How's he going to get them to submit to a Jew? Last time that the Jews had heard from the house of Israel, the lost 10 tribes, they kind of shot the birdie to the Jewish leader. How is my son going to get them to submit to him? God, this is impossible. And if you look in the Greek, when she says, I know not a man, that could, the way it's ambiguous, and that's my whole interest in this book, is that it is ambiguous. It could be taken as a virgin birth if you want to relinquish your claim to the Davidic throne for Jesus. But if you really believe the Messiah has to have a line to David through his loins, as it says in the Jewish Bible, then you've got to make this work. So you've got to reconcile it. So she says, I know not a man. I know not a man. Nobody can do this. Nobody can pull this off. Or she's saying, I'm not being with Joseph anymore. I know no more a man. It could be interpreted either way, because that word, I know not a man, was used in several other places as interpreted as no more. Like Rachel is weeping for her children because they are
It's
no
the same
more.
word? Okay.
And when Mary told Jesus they have no more wine at the wedding of Cana. So it could be interpreted, I'm not having relations anymore. Or it could be, I know not a single man that can pull that off, let alone my kid. There's a number of ways it could be interpreted, but the point is, what the angel just finished saying is a lot more shocking than you're engaged in, you're going to get pregnant.
Right.
Minimum, to skip over those verses, that's not... To go in front of your congregation and skip those verses when you're trying to persuade people that Jesus is the Messiah, and skip the role of the Messiah.
Oh,
how is that honest?
It's not honest. So is it common then that those verses related to the messianic promises are skipped?
Every time I've ever heard a pastor refer to this, even on websites, I've done website searches, they'll have the angel Gabriel telling her, you're going to conceive and bear a son. And she says, how can this be? I've never had sexual relations. And the word never, which is otopote, not ooh, which is not. They clearly transpose the word.
I see. Okay.
Totally changes the meaning. And they extract the messianic message that the angel was delivering to Mary, which is far more shocking than that an engaged woman is going to get pregnant.
It's also more important, too.
Yeah, if you're going to try to prove Jesus is the Messiah, you might want to mention the good news that the Gospel of Luke is trying to tell you is going to come to fulfillment. My opinion, but if I was trying to persuade someone that the Gospel of Luke is good news, I would tell them what the angel told Mary.
Right.
The messianic mission.
Yeah, without the messianic mission, a miraculous birth is really meaningless. Anyhow.
Exactly. Okay. So I think I beat that horse to death.
Yeah, I guess I might add too that the promise of Messiah before he's even conceived should be considered a miraculous birth in itself, without the virgin issue involved. Would you agree? In other words, if this baby is set aside, called for God's purpose before it's even conceived, that would be something very miraculous.
Right. Well, I mean, Jews have been carrying on that promise for a long time. I mean, goes way back, and when it happens, I think there'll be and I'm not talking about Jesus, I'm talking about when the completion of the messianic mission, the completion of it, which reminds me, I did want to, while I'm thinking about before I forget, like I did the other day, when King David was anointed, Jesus is referred to as anointed, the Christ. Christ means anointed. King David was anointed, but he hadn't gained full power yet because Saul was still alive. When he was coronated, that's when, do you understand what I'm saying? There was a difference between when he was anointed, he was set aside. There is an issue there between being anointed and, because the rabbis will say, and I think there's a validity to this, there has to be a national revelation of a Jewish king of Israel. Let me rephrase that. A king of Israel. There has to be a national revelation. Now, the argument could be made to a degree that when Jesus was on the cross and Pilate put the sign, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews," who were the witnesses? The Jewish leadership.
Yes.
So, but I will make that distinction that being anointed, there has at some point to be a national revelation. And in my personal opinion, that is why there is, like Paul said, a grace period. There is somewhat of a state of grace, like Paul taught legally by Jewish standards, there is a state of grace. But I just wanted to put that in there, but I do want to move on. Then Mary said to the angel, "How shall this be?" Okay. Okay. In context, Mary's question here begs the question, how shall what be, Mary? Technically, Mary did not deny knowing the man intimately when she was told she would get pregnant 3 verses earlier. She remained silent. Okay, verse 35, and this is fun. Verse 35, this is the King James Version. And the angel answered and said unto her, The Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Therefore also that holy thing that shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. In the commentary, I wanted to point out that in the Jewish Bible, when there were times when God would come upon somebody, and never once, and this was the Bible that Mary read, so this is her world, her context. She never went to a Catholic mass. In her world, when God came upon somebody, like in Judges 3 verse 10, Judges 6 verse 34, Judges 11 verse 29, 1 Samuel 16 verse 13, 2 Chronicles 15 verse 1, it brought on a military success. So again, even this overshadowing is bringing us back to this Davidic military and political success, which is what the Jewish rabbis are looking for.
Wow.
And this, in my opinion, is what the Gospel of Luke keeps bringing us back to. Not a virginal impregnation. If your background is nothing but virgin impregnations, yes, I can see how that's what you're going to get. If that's what you hear and then you read the New Testament, yes, I can definitely see that is crystal clear what that says. It definitely describes the virgin birth. But if I've been studying with rabbis for over 20 years, and I listen to Orthodox rabbis read the Jewish Bible, the Parsha, almost on a daily basis. And that's all I'm hearing is scripture.
Wow.
And so when I read this overshadowing, I don't hear virgin birth. I hear the Davidic promises. I hear military success because that's my context, which that was Mary's context. It's all about the context, and I'm trying to put myself in Mary's shoes. So anyway, and in fact, the apostles themselves expected Jesus to restore the Jewish political sovereignty to Israel. See Acts chapter 1, verse 6. When will you restore the kingdom to Israel? It was on earth. They were looking for it. That was their context. They weren't, when are we going to die and go to heaven? Even the apostles, this is after the resurrection. This is in the book of Acts. And they're still looking for those promises that the rabbis are looking for,
Interesting.
I want to point this out. Had the Jews, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which I think everybody agrees were written well into the first century, possibly into the second. So when Jesus was walking this earth and speaking with the Jewish leaders when they were bantering, he didn't just pass out his genealogies and say, this is me. He when they asked him questions, let's see if I can get you some. When they asked him, he dodged their questions about his genealogy, and this touched my heart. He dodged their questions about his identity. They wanted to know. They questioned him. You can check out John chapter 10, verse 24, Luke chapter 22, verse 67. Why would he do that? This is what I wrote. Jesus possibly was trying to protect the conscience of his fellow Jews by disguising his true identity, his trace to King David. See Acts chapter 3, verse 17. He could have conceived the idea to disguise his identity by the actions of King David, who also disguised his own royal identity when the Davidic throne was at stake. See 1 Samuel 21, verse 13.
Very interesting.
If he had just packed out his genealogy and he got up on that cross and Pilate, who had legal authority, said, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews, there is zero doubt in my mind that the priests, the Jewish priests, they would have charged and got him down and said, okay, we'll take it. But they didn't know because he wouldn't tell them. He protected their conscience. And then in the book of Acts, it is said that what they did in ignorance.
So that
it is said, and I want to point this out because when I grasped this, it blew me away. Yes, in the New Testament, many times it is said, whom you crucified. It is said about the Jews or to the Jews, whom you crucified. I do not think that was said as a word of condemnation, because it's also said that what they did was in ignorance because Jesus protected their conscience and not telling them who he was, but rather as because they were witnesses. You saw him, not only did you see him crucified, in other words, you saw he paid Rome's asking price for that title, King of the Jews. You saw it with your own eyes.
Yes.
This isn't his disciples coming up and saying, hey, we saw it with our own eyes. You saw it. You were there. You were part of this. You are eyewitnesses. He paid Rome's asking price for the title. Wow. It wasn't a condemnation. You wicked people, you did this. Your conscience, you're protected. You did it in ignorance, but you are witnesses.
Okay, so the revelation comes out at the day of Pentecost. Peter declares that this is the seed of David, the son of David. And boy, that's so interesting. So this should have prompted them at that point to accept Jesus as their Messiah.
From this point on, it's a different story.
Yes.
From this point on.
Right, because now their conscience should speak to them on this matter.
Right. But the act itself is clear. But he did say you did it in ignorance. Now that you're being told. But it struck me that they had to be part of it because they themselves were witnesses, so that it wasn't just the disciples saying, hey, we saw it. We saw him get crucified. It had to be. How else could he get all the Jewish leaders to come watch this, to witness the sign? It had to happen that way, according to Luke and Matthew.
So is there anything more to be said about the birth narrative from Luke?
Okay. Yes. Okay. These narratives eerily lack all of these legendary points of church oral tradition. Arguably, this angelic discourse with Mary has no virgin birth terminology in it whatsoever. Rather, it is rife with colorful Jewish terminology regarding a successful military overthrow of Rome, which obviously went over Rome's head due to ignorance of Jewish oral teachings in order to protect the messianic goal which Jews believed in, the overthrowing of Rome and the establishment of a Jewish government in Israel, which became a reality via the Balfour Declaration in 1917. In short, Jesus sought to reestablish a Jewish sovereign government in Israel, a kingdom. But you can't have a kingdom without, you got to have the land. You got to have a process here. Anyway, I do want to move on.
So just let me ask you a question.
I'm sorry?
Let me ask you one question. Are you suggesting that Jesus is responsible for the nation of Israel having a national identity today?
What I'm suggesting is that God is, and that the apostles, I'm suggesting God is responsible for all of what happened. And I'm going to address that here in just a minute. I do address that. But when Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world, I think what the apostles were saying, the Jewish leaders, when the Jews were Hosanna in the highest, they wanted to make a king, but they couldn't, because the Jewish leaders could not give Jesus something they did not possess. The Jewish leaders did not have ultimate authority over the Jewish people. Rome did.
Okay.
If he's going to truly have power over the Jews, he had to steal it from the Romans, which is exactly what I'm convinced Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are claiming Jesus did on the cross when Pilate said, okay, you want to be king? Here, I'll give it to you. While you're nailed to the tree, when it's safe, to give you legal authority. Okay.
Yeah, right.
And he dies.
Wow.
But then you got to deal with the whole resurrection story. It all hinges on if you come back, if you give this guy that much power, if he is a descendant of David. Now, if he comes back to life, with that much power, and he is a descendant of David, what are you going to do with that? That's what scared the Romans. You know, the Romans,
For good reason.
shaking in there. Eventually, the Romans did start getting scared and got down on their knees and asked the apostles help. This guy's up there. He's promising to feed our flesh to the birds. What do we do? And they said, get down on your knees, abandon your idols, get down on your knees, confess that the Davidic line is more powerful than all of your gods, all of your emperors, any king on earth. The God of Israel is the one true God, and serve him only forever and ever. Because if you don't,
Wow.
he'd come back any second and feed your flesh to the birds. And it worked.
Wow. 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 Powerful. Okay.
Anyway.
Well, continue with your train of thought anyway.
Let's go to 74. You mentioned this. We are in verse 74. It says in the King James that he would grant us that we would be delivered out of the hand of our enemies. Let's see. That he would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the hands of our enemies, might serve him without fear. Why would they be in fear? Because the Roman soldiers were swarming the streets, and if they tried to even think about getting rid of the Romans, they would get lined, the Roman candles. They would line these people on poles and light their bodies on fire. They called them Roman candles. That's what would happen if they were afraid the Romans could even hear them thinking about overthrowing the Romans.
Huh.
So I want to read this little commentary. Zechariah gives us insight into his hopes for this child in verse 74. That he would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the hand of our enemies and from all that hate us. We're talking about the Romans here. Mary could have hoped God would use her son, Jesus, to deliver the Jews from the hand of their enemies. Rome had taken over the land of Israel militarily. In fact, the Jews had been ruled by foreign governments for centuries. So did the apostles, in faith in this prophecy, actually trick the Romans into submission? Was it an ironic coincidence that the Roman Empire fell in about the same number of years that it took for God to free Israel from Egypt, about 400 years? That was after an incredibly zealous, admitted Pharisee flattered the Gentiles, promised them eternal salvation, then jokingly admitted that he caught them with trickery.
Well, there is salvation in the name of Jesus, is there not?
That's the irony of it. That is the irony of it. It's like
Tricked into salvation.
Come up with this plan,
Uh-huh. Well, that's God's mercy to the nations, is it not?
right? It's like who could, what human could dream up a better plan?
Yes.
I sure couldn't.
No.
I do want to read this.
Okay.
When Jesus was on the cross, and Pilate had given him that power, it's safe to give him legal power. That's why Jesus got crucified, because they had to crucify him, because, okay, now you're a king, so we have to crucify you. That's what made the crucifixion legal, because you're the king, so you're trying to revolt against Rome. That's sedition, so we have to kill you. Jesus' so-called kingship may have not been from this world. He claimed it was from heaven, but it could be interpreted that Jesus meant that his authority to rule came into this world through Rome. See John 18 and 19, who got it through the Greeks, who got it through the Persians, through Cyrus, God's anointed. see Isaiah 45, verse 1, who got it through the Babylonians, who got it through the last Jewish king, see Daniel 2, who got it from heaven. It came from heaven, went through all these people's hands.
Okay.
After all, Jewish leaders could not give to Jesus what they did not possess.
So can I add something to that
Yes.
matter? So I was just thinking about the situation where Daniel was before Nebuchadnezzar,
Yes.
and Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of this great tree that fills the earth, and he asks for an interpretation of that dream, and Daniel says, "You are that great tree." And he says, "The God of heaven gave you dominion over the whole earth," and so forth. So there is a recognition there that this dominion is given by God, and in this case, first to the Babylonians, and then later in the description of that well, I think actually it was the first dream that Daniel interpreted. Is that what you're referring to in Daniel? Is it Daniel chapter 2, where you've got the image that has the gold head and the silver breast, and then the bronze, and then the iron?
Right, I'm referring to
clay.
the
Yes.
statue. I would have to find my citation, but we're told in the Jewish Bible that Solomon sat on God's throne.
Okay.
But that authority, we're talking God's throne, passed through these people, but the Babylonians took over, and it passed through some more hands. Eventually it wound up in Rome's hands. But the New Testament writers are claiming Jesus captured it. He really, like a thief, he kind of tricked them, because they thought it was safe to, okay, we'll give it to you. You're dying anyway. What can you do with it? It's like putting all the gold in the coffin of Pharaoh. How's he going to spend it? But they weren't anticipating this resurrection story, which just totally fouled up their plans. Totally fouled up the Roman. Just fouled everything up.
Right. Yes. So Jesus became the living King of the Jews, who was given authority from the Roman government.
Yeah, it just fouled everything up. I do want to. This is a comment. It's just a comment I made. Persuading the Roman Empire to do something like giving legal authority to a Jew, like King of the Jews, persuading the Roman Empire to do something that would level itself, granting legal authority to a son of David, would have taken the most undetectable strategy known to the non-Jewish world. I suspect that's why it's not written down anywhere. It was just passed down orally, because if it had been written anywhere, if Rome had caught wind of it, they wouldn't have done it. If there had been lots of writings that the Messiah is going to be crucified and resurrected, do you think Rome would have done it?
No. So there's just another observation I'm making here. So the whole birth narrative itself, if it turns out that this is a birth narrative to clearly demonstrate that Jesus is the son of David through the Davidic line of Joseph, this likewise would have been purposely hid from the Roman Empire. You mentioned that already.
Right, to protect.
That's it's not just because they were afraid that Jesus would be killed. It's because the wisdom of God was hidden from their eyes, so that they could actually, there could come a time and season where this was all fulfilled, as you mentioned. That's brilliant.
Right,
The wisdom of God.
Let's see. I'm looking forward to getting to my last point. Okay, we're winding down, but my last point, when I realized that I had so much fun with it. We're in chapter 3 now of Luke,
Okay.
verse
Okay.
23, verse 22 and 23. And Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, which was the son of Heli. For those that don't know, that are watching this, the birth narrative in the Gospel of Matthew and the birth narrative in the Gospel of Luke contradict each other. And I don't buy the line of scholars that say, well, they don't contradict each other. They do. I read, there's no way to reconcile them except, and I have scoured the internet trying to find somebody else that says this, and it's not the Levite law. I don't buy into that story either. And I didn't even know this until I discovered, again, I got this from studying with the rabbis. In Numbers chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, if you open up your browser and type in Numbers 3, 1 through 3, Chabad, Chabad, and go to Numbers 3, verses 1 through 3, and click on Show Rashi, and go down to verses 1 through 3, you're going to find that Rashi will explain that this weird wording where it appears that the text is describing Aaron's sons as if they are Moses' sons, when we know they aren't. The reason the text does this is because, according to Rashi, Moses taught the law to Aaron's sons, therefore he's like a spiritual father.
Huh.
I took a class by an Orthodox Jewish rabbi, maybe 17, 15, 20, long time ago, 20 years ago maybe. First thing the rabbi did when we all sat down, he passed out a laminated piece of paper to everybody in the class. We looked at it. It was a genealogy, but it was not his biological genealogy. It was the genealogy of his teachers. And it went way back. Why? Because Moses did this. Moses has 2 genealogies in the whole Bible. 2 genealogies. One in Exodus 6:20, which is very similar, almost identical to Matthew's genealogy, where it's worded in this way. The father wedded the mother, and she gave birth to the child. In Exodus 6:20, for Moses' genealogy, it says Amram wedded Jochebed, and she gave birth to Aaron and Moses. Why it doesn't say, which would be more natural, that Amram begat Aaron and Moses, I don't know why. It's weird. It's a Mosaic way of saying that Amram was the biological father. For some weird reason, Matthew picked up on this and copycat.
I just have a thought as to why this might be the case. I don't know if you alluded to this or not, but when you're talking about, say, Jesus or Moses, maybe the author wants us to know who the mother is at that point, and so the language is changed.
Yes, and that happens a couple times. Tamar, also they wanted us to know in the Gospel of Matthew, definitely wanted us to know that Tamar was the mother. She's mentioned. Not all the mothers are mentioned in Jesus' genealogy, but Tamar was one of them. Yes, it's a Mosaic way. It sounds like a virgin birth way. Jesus and Moses were described as born of a woman. Neither one of them were described as begotten by their father. So you tell me, is that describing a virgin birth or not? Because
No.
either it is or it isn't. I go with Moses that it's describing a natural relationship between father and son. But okay, that's Moses and Matthew. So let's go to Moses and Luke. Moses' second genealogy, his only other genealogy, is in Numbers 3:1-3, which isn't a biological genealogy. It's a genealogy of spiritual children, which happens to be Moses was the spiritual father who taught the law to Aaron's sons, but it describes Aaron's sons as Moses' sons. So Luke picks up on that, and here we have Jesus' genealogy of his spiritual teachers, so here we have this compilation in Luke's genealogy, which is this beautiful way of answering what's the two questions that the Jewish leaders asked Jesus. Are you the Messiah? Which Matthew answers with the genealogy, the biological genealogy, which answers, yes, I'm the seed of David. And where are you getting these teachings? From whence has this man all these teachings? Which Luke answers by giving the genealogy of his teachers all the way back to God.
Okay.
It's the two questions the Jewish leaders asked him constantly. And Matthew and Luke answer both of those two questions with genealogies, which is the Jewish way of answering those two questions.
Wow. So interesting. Okay.
One more, this is the final, okay, yes, I want to give you a citation. When they ask, whence hath this man all these things? Matthew 13:56, by what authority doest thou these things? Who gave thou this authority? Matthew 21:23. So Luke is saying, God, because he traces that list of teachers all the way
Okay.
to God.
Okay. Adam, the son of God.
One more thing, I want to go. This is my closing remark on the Gospel of Luke, which I haven't come across a single virgin birth statement. Okay. When in verse 23 of chapter 3, it says, or verse 22, and Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, verse 23, as was supposed, the son of Joseph. If you go to BibleHub.com and click on the word son of Joseph, that word son, you click on it, there will be a Greek word there for son. But if you go down to the next, I think it's like 75 names where it says son of, the rest of that genealogy, there's no Greek word for son of. It's saying this man is of this man is of this man. Jesus is distinctly different. Jesus was the biological son. According to this, he was the son of Joseph. But from Joseph on, it's just of this person. Like, well, he's just his teacher.
I see. Okay.
All the way.
Wow. So Joseph.
That ends the gospel. That's it.
Joseph
I didn't see
happened.
any birth narrative. I didn't see any virgin birth narrative.
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps you're going to shake up the whole establishment, Deborah.
Without the foundation, if Jesus isn't the seed of David, and that's a quote from Apostle Paul, if you are following another Jesus, you got to make sure that you're following the Jesus that Paul and Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, there's not one explicit virgin birth. At minimum, I'm trying to be and I'm trying to stretch my imagination here. At minimum, I'm asking people to conceive that this birth narrative is so ambiguous that they need to look into the matter. But to plug your ears and close your eyes and say, that's not ambiguous. There's no way that a Jewish woman in the first century could possibly think that that could mean what her Bible says. That's a problem. That's a real problem. And honestly, it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter. It matters what God thinks. And, I do believe that the Jewish Bible was divinely inspired, and we're told, thy word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. That was written in the Jewish Bible. That is our light. King David wrote those words, or, it's in the book of Psalms. Let the Jewish Bible shed light, if you don't grasp the Jewish Bible, the New Testament isn't going to make any sense. I'm asking your viewers, go back and read and research. Don't look at the English translations. Go back and test what I'm saying. Look into the Greek and the Hebrew. Check out what I'm saying. Do not take my word for it. Look at what I'm saying. Really test this. If you take what I'm saying and say, oh, I agree, she's right, you're not being a Berean. This is what I want. I don't want to take my word for it. I want to inspire people to say, I better go look this up. Because that's what I did. I said, oh, that's weird. That's weird. I need to look into that. And it took me 17 years of just looking into this,
It looks like you've done the hard work.
Yeah, I'm just trying to inspire people to do their homework,
Yes.
I have questions. Yes. There's no dumb question.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to give us a thorough rundown of your work. And it certainly stirred my mind. I hope it stirs my audience as well. So, do you have any closing words?
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Tom. It's been a pleasure. And hopefully we can do another one.
I'm thinking that could be a possibility, sure.
The whole Rome incident, that's a whole nother story we didn't get into.
Right. No, this is good. You did one session of Matthew, now you did Luke. So there is more to talk about later, but I think you did this very thoroughly. So again, thank the Lord and you for your time. I wish you God's blessing. Do you have any closing comments? Any closing comments?
Yes. I made myself a little note.
Okay. Go ahead.
In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 to 12, talks about the man of lawlessness. There has to be law and order in God's kingdom. Now, what I'm describing to you with this natural birth interpretation aligns with the law laid out in the Jewish Bible. The law, it aligns with it. And so I just want to encourage people, read the law of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. If we don't want to be getting off into, the law, we don't want to get off into lawlessness. Law doesn't matter. Law matters. Because once we get into lawlessness, that's light, sirens, bells and whistles, danger. That's danger. Even the New Testament talks about the man of lawlessness. So I just want to leave people on that note. Beware of lawlessness.
Okay, right. Okay. God bless you,
God bless you. Thank you, Tom.
Okay.